Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to Old Man Rambles. And I hadn't planned on talking about Graham Platner anytime in the near future, but it seems well, I don't have to, but it seems I will. Graham Platner has dropped out of the Maine Senate race after one too many scandals was laid at his doorstep. So that's not really good for the state of Maine. It means this is after the primaries. This is nearly unprecedented that a candidate has dropped out after he's been nominated for the primaries. It basically means that the DNC gets to choose whoever they want to run against Susan Collins. And I don't think that's going to go well. Graham Platner have built up too much momentum. He stood a serious chance of beating Susan Collins before all these scandals broke. And whoever the DNC picks to replace him will not have that momentum behind them. And the DNC is going to pick someone who fits their idea of what they want in that political seat as opposed to what the people would want. So they're not going to give us a good candidate. And, when Graham Platner first kind of burst on the scene, and I looked into him and I listened to interviews, I watched some articles that had been written about him, and I liked the message that he had. I thought, oh, this is a guy who I might want to vote for, as opposed to feeling I have no other decent option. It's one thing to try and vote for the lesser. It's one thing to vote. I rarely get a chance to vote for someone who I think might do a good job. Most of the time I'm voting to mitigate harm as opposed to actually trying to improve things. And while I didn't think he had a good chance of actually doing any of the things that he truly said he wanted to do, he was at least someone who I felt actually wanted to do those things, as opposed to someone who was just paying lip service to the people to get their vote and then just following the political, towing the political line. And, just doing whatever is best for their career as opposed to what's best for the people of the state and of the country. So I did initially have good feelings about Graham Platner, but then of course the scandal started rolling in and my interest waned. And it waned a little bit more every time a new scandal rolled in. So now I have something I want to say, and I know it's going to be misinterpreted by people, even though I'm going to preface it by explaining myself first. But I'm going to say it anyway after I preface this. I am not advocating for Graham Platner. I do not think he should have continued to campaign after all this stuff came out. I think that there's just too many, he's got too many skeletons in his closet, too many examples of poor behavior that should disqualify him as a political candidate. But having said that, unfortunately, he was still the best candidate out there. Now again, I need to repeat myself, I'm not excusing his past behavior or the scandals that were laid at his feet, laid at his doorstep. What I mean is that in spite of all these things, he was still the best choice. And that really sucks. That this is the best that they could come up with. I mean, like I said, I liked his initial messaging. I mean, the DNC didn't want him there because he was not part of the political machine. He was going to rock the boat. And the DNC didn't want that. They wanted, they wanted things the way they wanted it. They wanted to suit their own political power. And Graham Platner said, no, you guys are part of the problem. We need someone who's going to actually try and fix something and not just go back to the way things were. Not trying, do a political reset of a few years ago. He seemed to actually want to make a difference. And he wanted to buck the system. And I think that is part of the messaging that got him to secure the primary. He got 72% of the vote. The other candidates, I mentioned Janet Mills, who had dropped out, got 20% of the vote, which is nuts. That someone who wasn't running anymore still got a good chunk of the 5%, a fifth of the vote. The other two candidates, LaFlame, I think, was a nice person. I don't think she didn't seem to have enough of the political savvy to have made enough of an impact. Graham Platner spoke well. He spoke roughly. He swore. He didn't, he wasn't quite as polished as some other politicians, but I think that worked in his favor. He was articulate. He knew and understood the problems of the people of the state of Maine. He seemed willing to address them. And he seemed to really want to represent the people and be a better politician than the ones we've elected for the last 40 years. So, if these scandals had not come out, I think he would have defeated Susan Collins. If he hadn't had such a checkered past, I think he stood a very real chance of ousting Susan Collins. Susan Collins, who has been in office for 30 years, which is way too long. And yeah, she is part of the political machine. She is just there to keep her seat. I'm not saying she never does anything good for the people of the state of Maine, but her campaigning isn't to really benefit the people, it's just to keep her seat. And I've said previously that I really don't trust her anymore, in spite of the fact that I have voted for her in the past. But a person running for political office who has said some deeply sexist and misogynist things, has some potentially racist things in his past, and a potential, charge of sexual assault. These are things that should disqualify someone for running for president. And I find it interesting that so many of the people who are saying he would have been an embarrassment to the state of Maine are people who voted for his opposition. People who voted for another politician who had scandals in his past: misogyny, racism, sexual assault, infidelity, dishonesty. And yet those didn't seem to qualify that other political candidate, didn't it? I've always found it interesting that when scandals come out, Democratic politicians seem to resign or drop out of the political race. When those same scandals come out, and people criticize them and say they shouldn't be in office. When those same scandals come across a Republican candidate, the response I usually hear about the people who have those scandals is, well, at least they're not a Democrat. Good hunting.